and in the process of that called this policeman a pleb. Interestingly, what we had is a High Court judge of some sort. Remember, this is in the civil courts, not criminal courts, and the standard of proof is different. In a criminal court in England, it has to be beyond reasonable doubt. I murdered you. Well, I've got blood on my hand. That's reasonable. You most likely did it, sort of idea. Therefore, in a civil court, it's merely the balance of probability. And what the judge seems to be saying, and I haven't read the whole judgment, but what the judge seemed to be saying, look, this PC plod, this stupid policeman, right, didn't have the wit to make up the story. He's too stupid, which strikes me as a little bit of ruling class arrogance there, but nevertheless, that's the story. And that was the policeman's story. The policeman's story was, well, I didn't make it up. I had to go home, look it up in the dictionary. Well, believe it, that's what the story was. That's what the story was. When the guy called him a pleb, he said, what the hell's a pleb? Went home and said, oh my God, I'm a Roman citizen, but not of the first order. Yeah, I can vote in elections, but etc. But you are one of the lower orders. It would also say that. You're part of the great unwashed, the mob, those down there. Now, if you look at the Tory party, I don't know, but on the balance of probability, I sort of more believe the policeman than I do the ex-minister. Why? Because if you look at the modern Tory party, we seem to have returned to type. If you look at the Tory party in Britain, up to the 1950s, into the 60s, some of us will actually remember that. The Tory party, in terms of the top, consisted, yes, of ex-Eton boys, I emphasise, maybe Harrow, maybe Winchester, but come on, let's be serious. Eton, Oxford, Cambridge, and it was a very narrow stratum of the population that ended up at the top of the Tory party that became your prime ministers. Often they were lords, they might have been sirs, but that was the sort of the nature of the Tory party. That was changed with Edward Heath, Ted Heath, a grammar school boy. It was changed with Margaret Thatcher. Didn't mean that they were somehow populist politicians, but if you think about this present lot, Osborne, Johnson, Cameron, they weren't just ex-Eton. If you look at the cultural background they come from, they don't just come from the Tory party. I haven't watched the film. It's not meant to be very good. I can't know what it's... Is it Posh Boys? It was a play. I think it's a better play. But basically, this is about their life in the Bullingdon Club. This is a heavy drinking, snob, violent club in Oxford. It's where young men get absolutely pissed out of their heads, throw the furniture around, wreck places, and just throw money at the landlord and said, well, fuck off, we are superior to you. That is the attitude of these people until they become politicians, at least in terms of until they have to present themselves publicly, right? If you read Hal Draper's book, I think Karl Marx on politics, I don't know whether that's volume 1 or 2 or 3, I'm not quite sure. I think it might be volume 1.
It's not 1.
It's not 1. Anyway, whichever volume it is.
Karl Marx's Theory of Revolution.
Yes, I can't remember which volume it is. But he makes a very interesting comment in it. And I think it must be Marx saying, well, look at these American politicians. They are interesting. Because in America, it was the first example of something approaching universal suffrage. Okay, let's forget women, let's forget blacks, let's forget Indians, but nevertheless, compared with Europe, and even compared with Britain, the franchise was far wider. Marx makes the point that actually that forces politicians to perfect the art of lying, right? Whereas in Prussia, or in Russia, or even in Britain, the ruling class would get up in your equivalent of the House of Commons or the House of Lords, and they would tell each other the truth. So you can read their speeches about the great unwashed, the mob, the hoi polloi, those down there, and how they are just scum, basically. once you start to approach anything like universal suffrage, they've got to lie about the people, and they've also, in that sense, got to make fancy speeches pretending to be Democrats, pretending to have concern for the people. After all, in the 19th century, except in Britain and except in the United States, the word democracy was an equivalent of a swear word. And it wasn't something, I'm a Democrat. That is something the extreme left would have said, right? It was only, as I say, in Britain, what would it be? In the 1870s, 1880s, that the ruling class start to use this terminology, steal it from the left. Anyway, my point is that is in public. And there's a difference, isn't there, between what you say in public, we all know it, and what you think in private, or think in private and then say in private. And quite frankly, the idea of Andrew Mitchell not using the word pleb, right, it doesn't ring true. You know, the Bullingdon Club, Oxford, Eton, I don't know what his exact background is, but it's upper class. Of course they do. Of course they talk about us like that in private. Just take another example this week, which sort of confirms it, doesn't it? Ex-Minister of Fun, David Mellor, who left government under somewhat bizarre circumstances. I won't go into it, but it involved wearing a Chelsea football shirt. But he goes out of government.
That wasn't why, actually, that happened. That was a scandal, and then later he took money off the PLO, somebody's
The
daughter,
PLO?
son.
Oh,
yeah.
I don't know about
Something
this.
about the son or something like that.
Okay.
He took money.
Carry on.
It was on Have I Got News for You.
Oh, okay, you're way up on it. I just remember him for two things: being Minister of Fun, which is like very strange, isn't it? And then the football shirt. Anyway, it doesn't really matter. The point I'm making is that he's made himself a new career as a talk show guy. He's still a Privy Councillor. Anyway, he gets into an altercation with a taxi driver and calls him all the things under the sun. You know, greasy little whatever, don't you know who I am, don't you know how great I am, you filthy little whatever. Now, okay, he was drunk, but we often say things when we're drunk, it's what we actually think. I mean, at least I did, you know. So, yes, he was unguarded. And so the idea that Andrew Mitchell wouldn't have said that, I don't buy it. Anyway, that's not really the point. The point is, I really wanted to get to, is that is how they still think about the ordinary member of the working class. Anyway, moving on, Egypt, just worth a comment. Hosni Mubarak gets off on murder charges on a technicality, goes back to his one presumably cushy military hospital looking over the Nile. He's got a couple more years officially to serve for embezzlement. But the reality is, of course, the present military regime doesn't want to make an example of Mubarak, wants to do the opposite, will actually have an incentive to rehabilitate Mubarak, because it is doing the same thing as Mubarak done. It will shoot people, it's already done that on a large scale. Remember the shooting down of Muslim Brotherhood demonstrations? It would do that to strikers, of course it would. And it also wants to continue its role as a kleptocracy of using its position in order to not only amass wealth for the top of the army, but also to amass wealth for individuals who are tops of the army. So what we've seen in Egypt actually is a return to a military dictatorship, although it isn't officially a military dictatorship. So Sisi was elected, so was Mubarak, and so yes, we have a return. What we need to say about that, I think, is really the role of the left here. Because what was tragic to me about the events in Egypt was the illusions that the left had in this spontaneous movement. that I can remember getting into arguments with people when we raised up the idea of what your slogans ought to be, what your strategy ought to be. I was talking along the lines of, well, we need to make the revolution, to use not a Marx phrase, but a phrase that Marx used in the 1840s. It's an old phrase even then, but we need to make the revolution permanent. By which he doesn't just mean some sort of Marlon Brando, I'm just a permanent rebel. What he means is that the working class is not yet in a position to come to power. What the working class needs to do under these circumstances is to constitute itself a party of extreme opposition. It needs, in that sense, the freedom to actually organise itself as a class, and that's what it needs to be fighting for. We had loads of the left really thinking that this was the equivalent, and people actually didn't just think it, they said it, so that's why I know. They actually equated what was going on in Egypt with the Russian Revolution. And we had people going on about, well, that was February, maybe this is our July days. I think it's utterly, utterly mistaken. We weren't in a situation where the working class was just about to take power. The working class did not constitute itself as a class, not in any conscious way, not in any way that it was in a position to bid for power. And as a result of that, the left completely downplayed the role of the Muslim Brotherhood. I mean, I'm not an expert on Egypt. I spent a month there as a tourist, went to Cairo, went to Alexandria, went down to Aswan, wandered through marketplaces, went to bazaars, and I tell you what I noticed, I couldn't escape from it, is the presence of the Muslim Brotherhood in the air. That, if your daughter was sick, what doctor do you go to? Well, there's a Muslim Brotherhood doctor. He'll look after you, right? If you need a loan for your business, who do you go to? A Muslim Brotherhood bank, right? The social security system had been withdrawn, I presume, since the ages of Sadat. I mean, his turn to America after Nasser and all the rest of it. So the welfare state had been slowly withdrawn. The Muslim Brotherhood had the connections, had the money from Saudi Arabia, to take the place inadequately, but nevertheless to take the place. The Muslim Brotherhood was popular. It was well organised and had been organised since 1928. Yes, it no doubt used Twitter as well. But what you had is journalists like Paul Mason basically in raptures over the fact that on demonstration people were using cell phones. And that this apparently put all old forms of organisation, into the shade, that this is all irrelevant, old stuff, that what we want is the new. And as a result, they did not take notice of the old, which was quite capable of using the new, but ignored the role of the Muslim Brotherhood until they come out on the streets, come to power. And then what did the SWP comrades, what do they call themselves, revolutionary socialists, what did they do in Egypt? They called for a vote for the Muslim Brotherhood. I mean, in the name of the revolution, they vote for counter-revolution. I mean, it's tragic. However small you were, and they were small, to actually have fostered illusions in the Muslim Brotherhood. And then what did they do? When the Muslim Brotherhood proves to be unpopular, they actually start to welcome the army. I mean, they actually welcomed the army in terms of its initial moves. They were out there in Tahrir Square when quite clearly the army, remember that huge display of fireworks? Who the fuck organised that? Who got people out on the streets if it wasn't the military-industrial complex? In other words, the role of the left were basically fostering illusions, first of all in the Muslim Brotherhood and then in the army. And then when they start shooting people, they say the army's bad. This is not what I recognise as left-wing politics. It's the politics of taoism.